They never let me finish a sentence. Not once. Not when I was 7, trying to share what I'd learned in school. Not at 13, when I offered a different opinion during dinner. Not at 16, when I dared to speak up about something that mattered to me. They didn't just talk louder. They made sure I never got to finish a thought. I grew up in a family full of loud voices, not just in volume, but in certainty. Everyone had something to say, and they said it like a declaration. Like the world should rearrange itself to listen. My uncles, my aunts, my cousins, especially my cousins. I was the youngest in most rooms, and the quietest in all of them. And I don't mean shy like nervous. I mean quiet like observant, careful. The kind of person who waits for an opening that never comes, then leaves wondering if it was her fault for not pushing through. At family dinners, they didn't even realize they were doing it. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. I remember one Thanksgiving when I was 12. Everyone was talking over each other as usual. Something about politics or a business venture one of my cousins had started. I found a lull and spoke up. I said, I read this study about how introverts... Before I could finish, my cousin Derek cut in. Derek said, "Oh, here we go. Another TED Talk." Everyone laughed. Then Rachel jumped in with a story about her job, and I just disappeared again. My mom gave me a soft pat on the hand under the table. Her silent way of saying, "It's okay, sweetie. Just let it go." But it wasn't okay, because it happened all the time. Once, during my junior year of high school, we had a big family barbecue. Everyone was there, 20+ people, loud voices, big stories, bigger egos. I'd just won a small scholarship for a coding project I'd built. Nothing fancy, but it meant something to me. I tried to bring it up when they asked how school was going. I said, "Actually, Derek rolled his eyes and said, "Don't tell me you're still doing that weird computer stuff. Get a boyfriend, nerd." Rachel added, "You're so quiet all the time. No offense, but I just can't picture you running anything." Uncle Dave chimed in, laughing. Uncle Dave said, "She's got the brains, sure, but leadership takes confidence, kiddo. You need volume, not just IQ." Everyone nodded like that settled it. I remember staring down at my plate, pushing a piece of chicken around with my fork, trying not to let my face show what I felt inside. What I felt was invisible. What I thought was, "You don't even know me." But I didn't say anything, because by then, I'd learned that in my family, the loudest voice won. Not the clearest one, not the kindest one, just the loudest. And I never was.
Not even in school. Group projects, I was the one doing the work while others presented it. In debates, I could write a great argument, but I struggled to say it out loud. Teachers praised my intellect, but always added the same note. They said, "You're very smart, but you need to speak up more." Speak up, as if it were that simple, as if speaking over people didn't feel like drowning in noise. I remember telling my cousin Leah once, just once, that I wanted to run something of my own one day. Maybe a nonprofit, maybe a business. I hadn't decided yet, but I knew I had ideas. Leah said, "You? Girl, you're sweet, but you're not a leader. You don't even like talking to people." That was the moment I realized something. They didn't just think I was quiet. They had decided quiet meant incapable. Invisible meant insignificant. And being thoughtful meant being weak. So I stopped trying to prove otherwise.
I let them talk over me. Let them keep their spotlight. Let them think they knew who I was. But inside, I started building something else. Not a rebuttal, not a performance, a future. One where I didn't need to fight for their attention, where I wouldn't be interrupted, because I wouldn't be sitting at their table at all. They didn't know it yet. But the girl they said was too shy to lead, she was already planning to own the room. It was Leah's post that told me. A group photo. 4 of my cousins standing in front of a whiteboard with the word Bridge Stream scribbled across the top in thick blue marker. Matching polos. Big smiles. Posed like a magazine spread. The caption read, Proud to launch our new venture, a true family business built from the ground up. A true family business, except they hadn't invited all the family.
I blinked at the screen, checked the tags. Derek, Leah, Rachel, and Mark. Even Mark, who once nearly flunked out of community college and was now somehow listed as their director of operations. No call, no message, not even a mention. They had started something together and never even thought to include me. I whispered, of course they didn't. It wasn't just the company, it was the message, the confirmation of what I'd always suspected, that in their eyes I didn't count. I was the one who listened, not the one who led, the one who got cut off, not quoted, the one who helped clean up, not the one who got invited to the strategy meeting. A few weeks later, we had a family cookout. I knew I'd have to see them, smile, pretend, let it slide, the way I always did. I wore my nicest blouse and arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late, just enough to avoid awkwardness. They were already gathered near the grill, drinks in hand, talking louder than anyone needed to. Derek spotted me first. Derek said, "Hey, the genius finally shows up." Leah chimed in, smirking. Leah said, "Did you see our launch? Pretty cool, right?" I said, "Yeah. Looks like a big step." Rachel joined in. Rachel said, "We thought about looping you in, but figured it might be a little too high pressure. You know, for someone who likes to work alone." Derek added, "Yeah, you're more of the solo type, right? Too shy for boardrooms." They laughed, like it was just good-natured teasing, like it hadn't cut right to the bone. I smiled, polite, wordless. Later, they started arguing about color palettes and whether their website should use serif or sans serif fonts. I stayed by the edge of the yard, helping my aunt refill the drink table. She looked at me and said, "They're really making a go of it, huh? You know, I always thought you were the sharpest one." I said, "Thanks. I've been working on something too." She smiled absent-mindedly. My aunt said, "That's nice, sweetheart. Good hobby to have." I didn't correct her, because it wasn't a hobby. It was a system, a real product, a project I'd been building on nights and weekends, after work, with my own savings. A platform designed to help creative freelancers manage their clients, contracts, payments, and taxes, without needing a business degree. I had beta testers already. I had a roadmap. I had traction. But they weren't asking, and I had stopped volunteering information in rooms where people had already made up their minds. That night, I sat at my desk in my small apartment and opened my whiteboard. It was cluttered with sticky notes and markers, half-finished diagrams, and reminders in Sharpie. At the top, I added one new sentence. "I'm not waiting for a seat at their table." Underneath, I wrote, "I'm building my own." They had meetings in co-working spaces. I ran mine over Zoom from my bedroom floor. They printed business cards. I designed my own backend. They networked with family friends and golf buddies. I pitched to strangers online, replied to every email, learned to fix bugs by trial and error. I didn't announce it. I didn't post a photo. But every time they posted a new team update, I launched a new feature. Every time they quoted a business article, I ran a usability test. They had noise. I had momentum. And while they celebrated their company without me, I was quietly creating something they couldn't imagine. Not just a product, a future. They were everywhere for a while. Articles, podcasts, panels. If you were even remotely in the startup world, you heard about Bridgestream. My cousins were branding themselves as the next big thing. Innovators, disruptors, visionaries. Rachel appeared on a tech blog's Founders to Watch list. Derek gave a TEDx talk with the title, "Leading Through Confidence, Not Consensus." Leah wrote a Medium post about scaling fast that got reshared over 2,000 times. They wore their startup like a costume, matching sweatshirts, inside jokes, slick branding. At the next family gathering, they arrived like royalty. Derek said, "We just closed our second round. 7 figures. Leah added, "And we're talking to a VC firm in London. They reached out to us." Rachel said, We're onboarding 20 new hires next quarter. The room buzzed around them. My mother turned to me and asked quietly, "And how's your little project going, sweetheart?" I said, "It's going well. We just signed on our 20th client." She smiled gently, but I could see it in her eyes. That look people get when they think you're saying it to make yourself feel better. But I wasn't pretending. Because while they had the spotlight, I had something else. I had a product that worked. It didn't look shiny. It didn't make headlines. But it solved real problems. Freelancers used it, then told their friends. Retention was high. My roadmap was clear. I wasn't scrambling. I was scaling. Quietly. Deliberately. While they went viral for a keynote speech, I was redesigning workflows that actually saved people time and money. While they posed for startup lifestyle photos, I was fixing back-end bugs with my lead dev over midnight calls. They had hype. I had stability. And over time, the cracks in their story started to show. Small things at first. A team member I knew from LinkedIn messaged me out of nowhere. He said, "Is Bridgestream always this chaotic? I thought startups were intense, but this feels unplanned." A few months later, their head of product quit and posted a long, vague goodbye about creative differences. Their app launched with bugs, critical ones. A payment delay issue that caused freelancers to miss invoices, Leah said at one family brunch. "We're reworking the platform, growing pains. It's all part of the process." Rachel added, "You wouldn't believe the stress. I haven't slept in 3 days." I nodded. But inside, I was watching. Because while their company was burning cash and chasing press, I was profitable. I didn't need press releases. I had spreadsheets. My monthly active users were doubling every quarter. I reinvested every dollar into the product. And then it happened. An investor reached out to me directly. He said, "We've been watching your growth. Quiet, but impressive. You're solving a real problem." We scheduled a call. Then a second. I pitched the product, the plan, the future. He said, "You're what we're looking for. Steady hands. Vision without ego." That stuck with me. Vision without ego. I didn't need to be famous. I needed to be effective. A month later, I closed a funding round. Modest, but more than enough. I hired 2 engineers, expanded our backend, built a marketing strategy that wasn't built on fluff. It was built on results. Meanwhile, Bridgestream began slipping. Fewer posts, more silence. Their last major update had typos. The blog went quiet. Leah started posting less about the company and more about her dog, and the next time I saw them, something was different. They still smiled, still talked fast, but there was a nervousness under the surface. Derek said, "We're pivoting a bit, trying to rebrand." Leah said, "We're restructuring some roles, getting leaner." Rachel didn't say much at all, but I did. I said, "That's smart. Sometimes smaller is stronger." Derek forced a smile. Derek said, "You still working on that little platform?" I said, "Yeah. We just got a new round of investment." He blinked. Derek said, "Oh, cool. From where?" I said, "Private group. They reached out to me." Rachel looked up, and for the first time in years, no one interrupted me. No one changed the subject. No one laughed. Because something had shifted. They had chased attention. I had built a foundation. And now their house was shaking. Mine was just getting taller. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because it was raining, and my assistant Mia had brought me coffee and said, "Looks like a quiet day, finally." It wasn't. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a short list of companies my acquisitions advisor had pulled together. Early-stage startups in our sector that had decent tech but bad cash flow. I like to keep an eye on opportunities. Sometimes there were gems buried under poor leadership. Mia said, "There's one more folder on your desk. Just came in this morning. Looks promising, interesting user base, messy operations." I opened the packet, read the top line, then froze. Bridgestream Technologies. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the name. For a second, I wondered if I was reading it wrong. Maybe it was a different bridge stream. But no, same branding, same pitch deck template, same logo I'd seen printed on mugs and t-shirts at family cookouts. Only this time, it wasn't in a press release. It was in a sale listing. Their company, my cousin's company, the one they built without me, the one they once said I was too shy to be part of, was up for acquisition. The packet was thick. Financials, client churn rates, exit memos. Their burn rate was out of control. Multiple missed targets. 3 executive exits in the last 6 months. A loan due at the end of the quarter. They weren't shopping around for fun. They were desperate. I sat back in my chair. Mia looked up from her laptop. Mia said, "Something wrong with that one?" I said, "No. Just a familiar name." She smiled. Mia said, "Want me to schedule a call to discuss the valuation?" I hesitated. Then I said, "Yes. Let's see what they're really offering." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, replaying old conversations in my head. Derek's voice, "Too shy for boardrooms." Rachel's laugh, "You'd hate the pressure." Leah's smile, "It's just not your lane." The memory of that photo, 4 of them, arms crossed, calling it a family business. And now, that same business was being quietly passed around investor inboxes like a fire sale. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt surreal, poetic, almost. The very company I wasn't good enough for was now sitting on my desk like an apology wrapped in spreadsheets. The next day, we had our first meeting with their representative. I didn't speak. I let my team ask the questions, dig into the data. After the call, my head of strategy, Amara, looked at me and said, "Honestly, it's not a bad acquisition. Tech's okay. User base still has some loyalty. But they've made a mess of leadership." I said, "So I've heard." She frowned. Amara said, "You've heard of them?" I said, "You could say that." 2 days later, I reviewed the deeper financials. They'd taken on too much too fast, outsourced critical features, overhired, under-delivered. Their branding was strong, their execution was chaos. But it was fixable. And suddenly, I wasn't just looking at this through a business lens. I was looking at it through every dinner they talked over me, every eye roll, every time they said I was better off doing something quiet and safe. I had something to say now, and I had the microphone. We moved forward with negotiations. At no point did they know who was behind the deal. It was a holding company I owned through a discreet LLC. All comms came through Amara and our legal team. I asked her, "Have they requested a meeting with the acquiring party?" Amara said, "They've asked." I told them if things progress, we'll set up a founder meeting. I said, "Let's progress." I needed to see them, not to gloat, not to rub it in, but to show them that I wasn't too shy. I was just too busy building. The meeting was set for Friday at 11 a.m. Our firm's downtown conference room was all glass and minimalism. Clean, intimidating in its silence. The kind of space designed to make people sit up straighter. I arrived early. Not to prepare, I was prepared, but to breathe, to center myself. I had no interest in revenge, but I wanted clarity. I wanted them to see me. Not the girl from years ago, quiet and overlooked, but the woman who had grown in that silence. At 10:56, Mia stepped in and whispered, "They're here." I said, "Send them in." The glass door opened. Leah walked in first. Still stylish, still composed. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. Rachel followed, her phone in hand, typing until the very last second. And Derek still wore confidence like cologne. Loud, overbearing, already mid-sentence. Derek said, "I told you it'd be some cold investor dude in a Patagonia vest. Just wait." They didn't look at me. Not yet. I stood at the head of the table, arms calmly folded. Leah glanced up first. Her smile froze. Leah said, "Wait, Rachel turned next. Her brow furrowed. Rachel said, "Is that?" Derek blinked. Derek said, "No way." Leah said, You're the buyer?" I didn't answer right away. I waited. Then I said, "Please have a seat." They obeyed. Just like that, the room changed. For the first time in our lives, they didn't talk over me. They waited. Leah cleared her throat and said, We didn't realize you were involved." I said, "I imagine not." Rachel muttered, "We thought this was a private equity thing, some faceless firm." I said, "It is. I'm the face behind it." Derek laughed. It was hollow. Derek said, "Wow, this is unexpected." I nodded. I said, "Let's begin." The presentation was already loaded on the screen. My team entered quietly: Amara, 2 lawyers, and our finance lead. I let them walk through our terms. Meanwhile, my cousins sat frozen, glancing between the slides and me. I caught Derek watching me, trying to read my expression. He said, "You've built all this?" I said, "Yes." Leah said, "We didn't know you were in business." I replied, "I've been in business for 6 years." Rachel shifted in her seat and said, "Your company? What is it called again?" I said, "You wouldn't have heard of it. We don't post selfies." They flinched just slightly. The conversation turned technical: equity splits, debt absorption, transition periods. I asked the questions. They answered. Rachel tried to steer things. Rachel said, "If we're retained, we can help with rebranding, marketing." I interrupted. "What you'll do is what the new management team decides, based on performance, not familiarity." She went quiet. Leah said softly, "We didn't mean to exclude you back then. It wasn't personal." I met her eyes and said, "It was never personal for me. It was strategic." Derek chuckled again, but this time he didn't look amused. Derek said, "Honestly, I can't believe this. You really flipped the script." I said, "No, I just stopped trying to read yours." The meeting wrapped with formalities. Hands were shaken. Terms were agreed upon. As they gathered their things, I stood again. And for a moment, no one moved. Then Leah said, "You really did it." I said, "Yes." And I didn't need a room full of noise to do it. They didn't know what to say. They left quietly. And I stood in the same spot, watching the door close behind them. For once, they didn't talk over me. They listened, because silence isn't weakness. It's just patience, waiting for the right moment to speak. And when that moment comes, it's undeniable. The papers were signed 2 weeks later. I became the majority owner of Bridgestream Technologies at 3:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, just after lunch, with very little ceremony. No cameras, no celebration, just a signature, a notary, and the quiet click of a pen cap closing. Mia asked, "Do you want me to order champagne?" I said, "No. Just coffee, black." Truthfully, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, balanced. I had acquired the company that once excluded me. The business they built without me, flaunted without shame, and protected with laughter, was now mine. Not to destroy, not to humiliate, but to rebuild. My first executive meeting was the following Monday. I walked into the office they once decorated in custom art and ping-pong tables and branding quotes on the walls. Now the walls were bare, the air heavier. Leah and Derek still held minor shares, enough to stay in the room, but not enough to sway anything. Rachel had already jumped ship, a strategic exit, or maybe pride. They stood when I entered. I said, "Let's sit." Leah spoke first. Leah said, "Thank you for not rubbing this in." I said, "I didn't come here to gloat." Derek said, "Still, you could have made it worse." I replied, "I didn't buy this company to get even. I bought it because I saw potential beneath the noise." They both nodded, but they didn't look relieved, because they knew I remembered everything. And they also knew I hadn't forgotten how they treated me. I laid out the plan: restructure, consolidation, new leadership hires, product refocus, culture reset. I didn't ask them to step down, but I didn't ask them to stay either. Everything would be evaluated, roles reassigned, salaries aligned with performance. Meritocracy, not memory. After the meeting, Leah pulled me aside. Leah said, "Are you planning to keep me on?" I looked at her, not unkindly, but clearly. I said, "I'll let the new COO decide, just like they would with any other manager." She nodded. Leah said, "That's fair." Then she added, "You always were more patient than we deserved." I didn't respond to that. I didn't need to. Over the next month, I made the hard calls. A few legacy hires were let go. A few stayed, but in new roles, under different leadership. Some handled it with grace. Others, not so much. Derek resigned a week later. He left a note on my desk. Derek wrote, "Didn't expect to work for you, but I respect you. Good luck." I folded it once and tossed it in the shred bin. Respect wasn't something you handed out once. It was earned. Daily. One afternoon, while walking through the office floor, I passed by two new interns whispering near the coffee machine. One said, "Is that the new owner?" The other nodded and said, "Yeah. She's the one who bought the company after it almost tanked." The first one asked, "Was she always in tech?" The other shrugged and said, "Don't know. But apparently she used to be part of the family that owned this." I smiled to myself and kept walking. I didn't need the full story told. I just needed the ending to be mine. Later that week, Amara came into my office. Amara said, "You know, most people would have gutted this place out of spite." I said, "And then what? Proved them right?" She laughed. Amara said, "Still, you didn't just take over. You elevated it." I said, "They thought I was too shy to lead." I wasn't. I just didn't want to shout. We sipped our coffee in silence. Because some victories don't need a spotlight. They just need integrity and time. The next family gathering was at my Aunt Celia's house, same as always. Same brick porch, same gardenias by the door, same too small living room with too many opinions. But the energy? Different. When I walked in, people stood a little straighter. No one rushed over to dominate the conversation. No one cut me off with stories about themselves. They didn't call me quiet or sweet. They didn't call me anything, really. They just looked. Leah was by the drinks table. She caught my eye and gave a quick nod. Not smug, not cold, just respectful. I returned it. Rachel, across the room, sipped her wine and looked away. I wasn't expecting more than that. And Derek? Derek walked up to me with a half smile and said, "Didn't expect you to come?" I said, "Didn't think I'd be invited?" Derek laughed, genuinely this time, and said, "You were always invited. We just didn't always listen." I said, "I noticed." He nodded and stepped aside. No further banter, no backhanded compliments, just silence. That was the biggest change of all. The silence wasn't dismissive anymore. It was reverent. At dinner, Aunt Celia raised a glass and said, "Before we eat, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I want to acknowledge someone special." I didn't flinch. I didn't expect it to be me. But then Aunt Celia turned toward me and said, "To the quietest girl at the table, who turned out to be the one leading it, we're proud of you." There were murmurs, light claps, but more than anything, there was stillness, attention. No one talked over me. And then someone said, "You should give the toast." It was Leah. She looked at me, not with competition in her eyes, but something else. Something like recognition. I stood slowly, not rushing. I let the weight settle. I said, "Thank you." They waited. I said, "Growing up, I thought being quiet meant being invisible, but I learned something." They leaned in. I said, "Silence isn't the absence of strength. It's the presence of intention." Rachel looked up. I continued. You all used to talk over me. And for a while, I thought maybe I didn't have anything worth saying. But the truth is, I was just waiting for the right moment to speak. There wasn't a sound in the room, not even a fork on a plate. I looked around and said, "They said I was too shy to lead, so I led them." And that was it. I sat down. No applause, no cheers, just silence. The good kind. The kind that follows respect. Later, as people trickled out, a few relatives came over. My cousin Elaine said, "You really own that company now? The whole thing?" I said, "Yes." Elaine said, "Good, I'm glad." My uncle whispered, "We didn't treat you right." But you didn't let that stop you. I nodded. I wasn't angry anymore. Because the truth is, I didn't need their apologies. I just needed to know that I didn't become something because of them, or in spite of them. I became who I am because I stopped waiting for permission, because I stopped needing to be heard by people who never listened, and because I finally realized I wasn't too shy. I was just too smart to shout.